Hello and welcome to NDTV. I'm Aditya Kaul. Over the last few days, there's been a crisis unfolding in Venezuela with the US Delta Force troops, in fact, leading an invasion in the country and then capturing President Maduro. Maduro, in fact, will be produced in a court and thereafter facing the justice and the wrath of the US system. But what does this say about the changing global order and how United States is trying to work out its own hegemonic tactics? Joining us right now is Ambassador YK Sinha, the former ambassador to Venezuela. He's been the High Commissioner to UK and Sri Lanka as well. And of course, he's India's former Chief Information Commissioner. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for joining us and taking out time. Let me begin by asking you your first reaction to what you saw. You've been there back in 2007 to 2010, but that was a different time, certainly. Although socialism was being pushed at that time as well from a former leader. But what are your impressions of what you saw on the television screens and social media of the kind of invasion that happened and the way the president was captured?
Well, it reminds me of a bygone era of gunboat diplomacy. If you recall, Noriega of Panama was also captured and then brought to the US for justice, again accused of narco trafficking, drug trafficking. In this particular case, I think it was expected that the US, after mounting such a large armada on the Caribbean Sea just outside Venezuela, that some action is imminent. And what sort of action, of course, everyone was guessing. But frankly, I didn't expect that in the first few days of the new year, an assault would be launched in this manner.
Right.
The way he was captured, the stealth with which the Americans moved in, and the fact that they pretty much managed to neutralize the defenses and capture President Maduro and his wife, and then take them to a ship, the Iwo Jima, and then, of course, to Guantanamo Bay in Cuba, and then from there, of course, to New York to stand trial. And the visuals of him in handcuffs, blindfolded initially, and then later on walking around, sends a very powerful signal, I would say, to the rest of the world and certainly the countries in the region.
Well, also, you must have heard Donald Trump when he spoke a day after the capture of President Maduro. And a lot of what he said was less about drug trafficking, a lot about the oil diplomacy and how there is oil infrastructure, at least 19% of it in Venezuela, and how the US companies will now create inroads and try to make Venezuela great again. What were your impressions on that? Is this United States trying to work out a new kind of a colonial system? And also, what kind of a message does it send when we are talking about a multipolar world, but the United States hegemonic tactics clearly out and open?
Well, what struck me when he said that now we've moved from the Monroe Doctrine to the Donroe Doctrine.
Yeah.
But this power grab or the land grab or resources grab, whatever you call it, is nothing new, especially regarding with respect to Venezuela. Because, before President Chavez came to power, I think in 1999, Venezuela was ruled by governments which were pro the US, capitalist governments, and the oil production was pretty much in the hands of American and European countries, mainly American. So what happened was that initially in 1976, I think, the National Oil Company of Venezuela, PDVSA, was nationalized, and then in 2007, President Chavez took control. So as a result, a large number of the American and European companies, apart except Chevron, I think, left. So what happened was that the investments that they had made in technology, in machinery over time, got degraded. And the sanctions that followed against Venezuela impacted their oil production and their oil exports. So a country which has the largest reserves of oil was reduced to exporting a minuscule amount compared to what their output was earlier and what the potential is. So I think what has happened is when President Trump says it is our oil and that they're going to run Venezuela, he's harking back to a period where American companies had pretty much the run of the land in Venezuela. And that is why there was a reaction by Venezuelan people, by the voters, and they sort of voted in Chavez, a charismatic socialist leader who was in the army. But of course, President Maduro, his successor, is not the same sort of, how do I put it, in the same class or it doesn't have the same charisma that
Right.
Chavez.